You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 127. I think we're all mentally ill. Those of us outside of the asylums only hide it a little bit better. Stephen King.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood, when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle's Filmmaker Process. We provide screenwriters with professional services to get their films or series packaged, funded, finished, and distributed. Some of the services we offer are pitch deck creation, film budgets and schedules, domestic and international sales estimates, legal contract templates, and consulting. If you're looking to package a screenplay or project, Filmmaker Process can help. Head over to www.filmmakerprocess.com. Now, guys, today on the show, we have writer, producer, and director Mick Garris. Now, you might know Nick from writing amazing 80s classics like Batteries Not Included, Critters 2, and The Fly 2. He's also known for writing another little film called Hocus Pocus, the most successful Halloween movie of all time, even more successful than the other Halloween movies. He has also been the director of the 90s classic Sleepwalkers, written by Stephen King, a short film by Michael Jackson called Ghosts, which he collaborated with the legendary Stan Winston and, of course, Michael Jackson. He was also the story editor of the legendary 80s show Amazing Stories by Steven Spielberg. And if that's not enough, he's also the director of one of the biggest miniseries of all time, The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, and the Shining miniseries as well. I mean, Mick has done so many things. I don't want to keep going and going. It's just pretty insane the amount of stuff he has done. And this episode, we just go throughout his career. We talk about his craft, how he writes, how he got into the business, how he crossed paths with Steven Spielberg, and how that kind of helped him move along in his career, to say the least. And so many amazing stories about the people he's worked with, and so much more. I can't wait for you guys to listen to this. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mick Garris. I'd like to welcome to the show Mick Garris. How you doing, Mick?
Great, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I was telling you earlier, I was extremely excited that you agreed to do the show, because you're your own established podcaster as well, with a great show, and you've interviewed some giants in the business as well. So I was humbled that you said yes, sir. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm humbled that I'm able to work with some of my heroes, and it's a pretty exciting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, how did you get started in the business?
It's sort of a long story, but I had been writing since I was 12 years old. I wrote short stories and all that sort of thing. And, I was born in L.A., but no one in my family had any kind of connections to the entertainment business or anything. And so I started out as a journalist, and I interviewed people when I was like 16 years old, like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and stuff in music.
Not so bad.
Ray Bradbury was my first interview, and Rod Serling was my second.
Oh my God.
So I was always able to meet my heroes and learn about them. You know, something that was always really important to me was my curiosity. So I was doing film criticism and interviews and writing screenplays on spec and trying to make a go of it. And I finally had some material that made for agents wanting to meet me and maybe work with me, because an agent only wants to represent you if they think that it's easy to sell you. If you are a marketable commodity, it doesn't matter how nice a person you are or, you know, how well you play with others. But if they feel that they can make money off of you, it's great. So I went through a couple of agents who never really did me any good. And I was, you know, making my living working at Tower Records and that sort of thing. My first job was as a receptionist at George Lucas's Star Wars Corporation during the first Star Wars. And I actually operated R2-D2 on the Oscars that year. But I was basically a receptionist.
That's awesome.
But it allowed me entree to the Universal lot and looking at how people made movies, seeing Alfred Hitchcock on the lot towards the end of his life. And finally, an agent named Rick Jaffa, who is now a very successful screenwriter with his wife and partner, Amanda Silver, he was an agent at William Morris. And he was the first guy who read my stuff, believed in me, and actually got my material in front of Steven Spielberg's company. So I was doing publicity, and I'd hire myself to do making ofs because it was a lot more affordable than the studio would spend. And it would give me film school on how to take pieces of film and put them together into a narrative, even in a documentary format. So I did the making of Gremlins. I did the making of the Goonies. And I had an interview show on the Z Channel, which was the first pay TV channel in Los Angeles. So I would interview filmmakers who made the films that were scheduled to come up on the Z Channel schedule. And one of those filmmakers was Steven Spielberg. And after we did the show, I mean, I'm doing all the talking here, Alex, but
please continue.
But after the show, he said, you know, I really enjoyed that. And he didn't usually enjoy all the interviews that people normally ask, all the same canned questions and all, but there was a shared passion for movies from a similar background as my own. So when I was making the making of the Goonies on the first day of shooting in Astoria, Oregon, the cameraman was setting up the lighting and stuff to interview Steven for the documentary. And he said, you must do a lot of these sorts of things. And I said, what nobody should ever say to Steven Spielberg was, I'm trying to do less because I'm trying to make a go of it as a screenwriter.
What I really want to do is direct Steven.
Right, yeah. Well, I would never say something like that today. However, then he said, oh, really? We're looking for writers for this new show I'm doing called Amazing Stories. So it turned out my agent had gotten Amblin a spec script of mine called Uncle Willie that has still never been made. But I got to read the coverage that they did, and the last 3 words of the coverage were, hire this man. So Steven called me and asked me to write the first episode of Amazing Stories that was ever written. And I wrote it in 3 days. I mean, it was like a call from Steven Spielberg, and you
do it. And by the way, for everyone listening, it's Steven Spielberg circa what, 84, 85?
This was in 1985.
85. So it's post E.T. and everything else he did prior to that. So he's already Steven Spielberg. He's been Steven Spielberg for quite some time. So it's like basically a god coming down from Mount Olympus and touching you on the shoulder and go, you now shall write.
So, I mean, we get a phone call and I pick it up, and Steven Spielberg calling for Mick Garris, and I'm looking at my wife in our little cracker box house in the valley. It's Cynthia. It's Steven Spielberg. It's Steven. And then they asked me to write a screenplay based on one of his 2-paragraph story ideas for Amazing Stories. And I knocked it out in 3 days. And they read it and asked me to do another one. And then a day and a half into it, I'm only halfway through, and he and Kathy Kennedy called me to ask me if I would go on staff as the story editor. And I had never done anything like this before.
Jesus.
And so suddenly I'm in a $100,000 a year job back in 1985 when I was on food stamps when I got that job.
Oh my God.
So it's a convoluted story, but that's how I got my first writing job.
So, and again, not a bad first job.
I would say not.
As first jobs go, not too shabby, not too shabby. So, by the way, I was obsessed with Amazing Stories when it came out. My favorite one, I still remember it to this day. I mean, obviously the Kevin Costner one was fantastic, which I think was the first episode, wasn't it? Steven directed that one.
That was the second season, the first episode.
That one, and I remember the train. I think the train.
He did both of those, yeah.
Right, I remember those two. But my favorite Amazing Story, besides when Santa got arrested, which was fantastic, was the episode where the kid had the goo that you poured it on a picture, and the picture came to life, and he was like a horny college kid, and he just was trying to get this girl, and then you would get half a girl or too big of a girl, and it was like trying to get it perfectly, and whoever kissed the girl first, it was theirs forever. It was just obviously because it was such a dream for any adolescent.
Definitely, and for some adults,
obviously. And I love the ending of that. I'll never forget it. Sorry, spoiler alert for everybody, but it just spills onto a Fangora magazine or something like that, and it just fades to black. I was like, oh, that's amazing. But I remember that show so well. I guess, that experience, it must have, starting at that level must have, I didn't say jaded you, but you understood later on that it's not all like that. Like that was kind of like the red carpet.
Right. But I was also 33 years old when it happened. So I had been writing for years and years and years. Like I said, since I was 12 years old is when I first seriously started writing. Mm-hmm. And so I've never gotten jaded about it. Good. The excitement of being able to do what you dream of doing, a lot of people get spoiled by it and expect their lives to continue to be at the top of the heap. I'm always concerned that I'm going to fuck it up. and every time, especially directing, every time I do it, I feel like it's my first time out and that I've got a lot to prove, and being contemporary and being aware of the technology of filmmaking as it metamorphosizes. But as far as writing goes, writing has always been, I'm a rather facile writer in that it comes easily to me and I love it. And I'm just lucky to have been born with a facility for writing, and I'm good with language, and stories come to me quickly. I mean, when I'm writing on spec, which is almost all the writing I do, I just sit down on page one. I don't do an outline or anything. I have an idea, and then I just plow into it and let the tributaries take me where as they will.
But when you say that, and I've heard other very established screenwriters say the same thing, but do you agree that, for screenwriters just starting out, you're able to do that because you've been writing forever. So the structure you already almost instinctively know how to structure the story and the screenplay from stage one where you don't have to outline. But from somebody who's just starting out, would structuring an outline make sense?
Well, I think it depends on the writer. Every writer works differently. Mm-hmm. And for me, I started out that way because I'd been writing, but not writing screenwriting. I'd been writing short stories and the like for a while, but I've always watched movies and television my whole life. And I think that there's an intuition that grows within you as you consume screen storytelling. So when you're writing on assignment, you have to do those steps. You do a treatment, and then you do an outline, and then you do a draft, and then because every step of the way, you're going to get interference from the studio executives, from the director, if you're not the director, and all of those sorts of things. So every way is valid. For me, I used to think, wouldn't it be great if I took 6 months to write a script? Think how good it would be. And for me, if I took 6 months to write a script, that means I'm having trouble, and it's labor. It's not coming out like the magic. It's not storytelling. It's a job. And so I am lucky to be able to write quickly and fairly simply. But again, on the jobs where it's an assignment, then you have to take each step at a time. And then it's never your own unfiltered storytelling. You're going through the hands of a lot of other people.
Now, do you start with plot or with character? Like when you sit down, do you already have a plot in your head, or are you starting with a character and it's like, let's see where this guy or this gal's adventure goes?
Well, it's kind of half and half. I'll usually start with a character, and of course, every character you write. I tend to write my fiction. Even I write books as well. A lot of my fiction is written in the first person, and when you're writing a screenplay, every character is the first person. So there's always some facet of who the writer is, or who he or she imagines he is or would like to be. It's just a matter of empathy. And usually I'll have an idea of a character who is somewhat thwarted in his life, whether it's romantically or ambitions. There's a roadblock. And that roadblock is part of what the story is. And then I'll take a combination of who that character is and why his quest is not an easy one.
Now, when you said earlier that you shot a lot of making of documentaries of films like The Thing and Goonies and is it Gremlins as well?
Gremlins, yeah.
So you're on the set with, a rogues gallery of some of the most amazing directors of their generations. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned from just being there and watching their process day in and because as a making of, you're there every day shooting what's going on?
If you're lucky, with the budgets we had, I was there for a couple of days or a few days out of the production schedule. Mm-hmm. But surprisingly, the thing I learned most is how much of the movie is directed off the set. The conversations with the production designer, with the DP, with the actors, all of those things, you're really seeing almost the finished product when you are on the set and watching them work. That said, watching how a director elicits a performance from an actor, the lighting has already been planned out. The shots in general have been planned out depending on what the director's style is. But the job of a director is to communicate. And a writer doesn't have to be very communicative. They're very different disciplines. A writer is monastic and onanistic in a way, whereas a director is confronted with being a social animal. He has to be able to communicate, not only communicate what the overall movie is so that each department head and each actor isn't making a different movie choice, but to be able to instill enthusiasm and confidence and excitement that they're doing something special, and to be encouraging people, whether they're cast or crew, to do their best work because they're going to make something really special together. And there are directors who are directors because they enjoy being autocratic. They like to be the boss, and they like to throw their weight around. Nobody's going to do their best work for somebody who yells at them. Mm-hmm. You get their best work by being a teammate and somebody who encourages the best ideas from every department. Even if it's craft services, somebody from craft services has a good idea, I'll take it,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, your first is this your first feature or one of your first features that you wrote was called Batteries Not Included, which I have an absurd love for because I remember it. I remembered it, and everyone listening, please forgive me, back in my video store days, when I was there renting it out and recommending it to people, and it was a Steven Spielberg produced film.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
If I remember, but you also co-wrote that with another. He's done okay for himself, Brad Bird, as well. So how was it like coming up with that? It was very cute. It was just adorable. It's just like an adorable film.
Yeah. Well, it's what Spielberg was known for in the day. So that story was originally an Amazing Stories episode called Gramps and Grammy and Company. The idea was Steven's. He wrote out a paragraph or two. And then I wrote a screenplay for the TV show. And then he changed his mind and said, I think this idea is big enough for a feature film. So I wrote the feature film script. I wrote 2 or 3 drafts. And then when Steven brought in Matthew Robbins to direct, Matthew Robbins brought in Brad Bird, with whom he had written before. In fact, the first script I wrote for Amazing Stories was The Magnet Kid, and Matthew Robbins directed that, and he brought in Brad Bird. So I didn't write with Matthew or Brad. Mm-hmm. As you know, when it's a writing team, there's an ampersand between your names. Mm-hmm. And if you're writing and rewriting somebody, there's an and between your names. And I've been lucky enough to be the first writer on virtually every movie that I'm a screenwriter and not a director on. So, yeah, it was very much Steven's idea. And Matthew Robbins had co-written Steven's first movie, The Sugarland Express. Mm-hmm. And so he felt very, very beholden to him and gave Matthew an opportunity to do a big Hollywood studio picture, which worked out really well for him. But, it started and ended with Steven Spielberg,
as it always does. I mean, I've had the pleasure of speaking to some amazing filmmakers and writers on this show, and I cannot, and I say this all the time, I cannot believe the Spielberg touch. He has touched so many careers of filmmakers. I had John Lee Hancock on, I had Kevin Reynolds on, and they were telling me, so I'm like, I had no idea that Spielberg was the one that kind of cracked the door open for them. And he's done that for so many people around this business. It's remarkable. It truly, truly is.
It's kind of what he wanted to do with Amazing Stories. Yes, get Martin Scorsese and Clint Eastwood and, mucky muck directors. But he also gave first-time opportunities to people like me and Todd Holland and Leslie Linka Glatter and Kevin Reynolds, directed one of the episodes. Mm-hmm. So he really wanted it to be kind of a flower box for new blooming directors. And it was an opportunity you don't often get.
Yeah, and it just never ceases to amaze me, the influence that Steven has had on Hollywood history, not only from himself, but the opportunities he's given to so many people along the way. It's been pretty remarkable. Now,
he's a very generous guy.
Yeah, and I've had out of all my on-air and off-air conversations about Steven Spielberg, because some of the best conversations I have are off-air.
Don't tell your audience that.
Yeah, I mean, no, of course, obviously, all the good stuff's here, sir. What do we say? Yeah. But some of the most interesting, I've never heard one negative thing about Steven Spielberg from hundreds of conversations. He is just one of those guys that just is a class act, and it's pretty remarkable what he's done. Now, I have to say that I think it was your first directorial film, Critters 2. Now,
the timeless classic.
The timeless classic. So obviously, there were questions left over from Critters 1 that needed to be addressed in a sequel, obviously.
It was an absolutely necessary sequel that the world could not have lived without until it came out. And opening night, I went to my local theater in Universal City, and there were 3 people in the audience.
So How did you? I mean, listen. I remember Critters too. I remember Critters. It was obviously after Gremlins, so it was kind of like a spin-off of Gremlins. And there was
to be charitable, it was a spin-off.
It's actually to be fair. There was one that was even a little bit more Ghoulies, was even actually a little less connected to the original material.
That's for sure. There's Spookies, there's Ghoulies, there's all kinds of little creature movies out there.
After Gremlins, yeah. But it was your first shot directing, really, wasn't it?
Well, I directed an episode of Amazing Stories.
Right.
And before that, I wrote and directed a Disney TV movie, which was my very first, a 1-hour movie called Fuzz Bucket. Mm-hmm. That was a story that Stephen rejected for Amazing Stories.
Fair enough. But Critters it was a sequel. It was, it had a decent budget, if I remember.
Well, for what we were doing, the original Critters was much better than anybody expected it to be. It was a $2 million movie, which for a little indie, little creature movie was not insubstantial. And it was mildly successful at the box office, but made most of its money on home video. And so they decided, well, time for Critters 2. And I think the reason I was hired, and Bob Shea, who was the head of New Line, gave me the opportunity to do this, for which I will always be indebted. But David Toohey had written a script, and he was very happy where it was. Bob Shea felt that it needed more. And rather than just hire another writer, the idea was to hire a writer-director. So it would be a much easier game to actually have the shooting script done by the director. And I believe that because Critters was very Spielbergian in the first movie, and even more so in the second, that they wanted an associate of Steven Spielberg, so maybe some of his pixie dust would rub off on the project. And because stylistically, I absolutely was influenced by Steven Spielberg and Joe Dante in the making of Critters 2, and by Warner Brothers cartoons and all those things. But the idea of Norman Rockwell Goes to Hell is something that fits very, very well into the Spielberg canon. And I think that's what they were looking for at New Line. It was a PG-13. It wasn't an R-rated horror movie. And, we got away with one naked lady and some critter violence that wasn't too incendiary. But yeah, it was an opportunity to be both writer and director. And it was on a scale that I thought was so manageable. However, it was special effects, kids, animals, a big cast.
The trifecta.
Yeah, action scenes, all this on a $4 million budget. And with that $4 million, we built the town. We did all kinds of amazing things. So we got a lot of bang for the buck. But, Gremlins was made for $10 million. And Gremlins 2 was made for $60 million. So
is it $60 million the Gremlins 2 cost?
I think so.
Holy, that's a lot for that time period.
It definitely is. But it came well after the first one. So it was, yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable. Now, after Critters 2, you jumped onto another sequel, writing from another successful first film, The Fly, which is arguably a classic at this point. And
I would say so. Yeah, I love that film with a passion.
Oh my God! And I mean Jeff Goldblum, and that kind of made Jeff Goldblum like that. I mean, Jeff had been acting for a while, but I remember when that came out, everybody was talking about The Fly. It was like the first time, and it was Cronenberg and, in his element. Oh, it was fantastic. Then of course you get the daunting task of writing the sequel to a very successful, loved film. How did you approach writing a sequel to such a hit?
Very differently than what you see in the movie that was made. I was the first writer on that. And I came up with an idea. I wanted it to be as respectable as the Cronenberg film. Cronenberg's a friend. I love his work to death. And the depth and intelligence and humanity of that movie was something you rarely get in a genre film, especially a monster movie, which when you come down to it, that's what it is. But it's so much more than that. It's a romance. It's an impossible romance, which is a theme I really like and return to time and again in my own work, fiction and film work. But so my idea was something quite different. It had to do with giving the baby up for adoption because, she was going to have an abortion. But the original idea was that it would be an evangelistic group that takes the baby from her, as they do with other young mothers who don't want to abort, give it a good Christian household, but they are training it and all these other children in the way that in the Soviet Union, in Russia in the 30s, they did lots of experiments where they would exercise children mentally and physically to be far beyond the powers of mortal men and women. They would develop their psychic abilities. They would give them Olympic training from toddlerhood on so that they would become superheroes, basically, in reality. And, I wanted it to be a Christian army sort of thing. So it was a really interesting adult kind of attitude. But the head of the studio wanted a teenage monster movie. First, Scott Rudin was our production executive, and he's great and has gone on to produce a bunch of really high-end movies for the Coen brothers, for lots of other people. Has run into some Me Too issues in the last year or two. But there was a change in management, and Leonard Goldberg, who was half of Spelling Goldberg, the people who made The Love Boat and other TV shows, Leonard Goldberg was named the head of the film studio, which was very controversial at the time because he'd only done television and not features. And Leonard Goldberg wanted a teenage monster movie. So there was a lot of infighting between Scott Rudin and Leonard Goldberg. And I was, in the middle and trying to accommodate both masters. And the offer of Critters 2 came to me. And so I had to leave the project of Fly 2, which was in the middle of all those problems. Then Frank Darabont inherited all of those problems. Frank Darabont was the second writer, and then Jim and Ken Wheat, who had done Young Indiana Jones and some other things. They were the final writers on it. So it changed quite a bit from where I was and where it ended up.
Yeah, and Frank did okay as well. I think Frank.
He's done all right.
He's done. I think he's written a couple other things. I'm not sure what, but he's done
one or two
other things as well. Now, another film that you directed, which you didn't write, but you directed, and arguably was one of my favorite films growing up in the horror genre, was Sleepwalkers. I absolutely adored Sleepwalkers, and not just because it was just a cool. I was in high school probably when that came out, so I'm dating myself, but I was probably around high school time when that came out, and I had the largest crush in the world on Madge and Mick. I mean,
you're not alone.
It wasn't just me, I'm sure. But I mean, holy cow, she was amazing. I just adored her. And then forgot the lead actor's name, who was also in the
Alice Krieger. Yeah.
Yes, who was also in Blue Lagoon and Charmed and
Brian Krause.
Yes, Brian Krause. Thank you. That was his
Return to the Blue Lagoon.
Yes, Return to the Blue Lagoon, and then he went on to Charmed and all that stuff.
And then Alice Krieger from Ghost Story.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It was remarkable. But you wrote you directed an original screenplay by Mr. Stephen King, not too shabby of a writer himself, and he doesn't. I don't think he does. I think this was this was an original screenplay that had nothing to do with original material. So it was an original idea.
His first original screenplay to be produced.
Correct.
And
what was this like?
So yeah. Well, I never met him until I screened it for him afterwards, but we would talk on the phone, and he was incredible. I mean, we've since become very good friends and have worked together a lot. And I'm lucky enough to have had 4 projects that he wrote the screenplays for himself. Sleepwalkers was the first one. It was also my first studio movie as a director, and really my only studio movie as a director, feature film. All of the other stuff I've done has either been television or independent. And then after that, I mean, we got along so great, and he was so happy with how Sleepwalkers turned out and the battles that we had to fight together that he asked me to do The Stand the next year. And I had only done movies of a relatively small scale. And then along comes The Stand, which is 100 shooting days, 6 states, 126 speaking roles. I mean, it's always massive. On the road.
It's massive.
Massive. And that experience was also my first experience with an unmitigated success. Sleepwalkers opened as #1 in the movie theaters in America that week, but dropped out very quickly. The Stand became the highest rated miniseries ever. The 4 nights it ran, it was #1, 2, 3, and 4 that week, but each of the nights went up. It was 50 million people who watched it in North America each night, but it went up each of those 4 nights, which is very rare. And, you know, it was incredible to have made something, first of all, with Stephen King. But secondly, that cast, I mean, Gary Sinise and Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis and Matt Frewer and Rob Lowe, and, you know, so many people. But also to go into a supermarket and hear people talking about it the next day.
That must be crazy.
It's not something that happens very often. Right. And, you know, nothing I've done ever reached the heights of what The Stand did. Well, except Hocus Pocus.
Yeah, which, we'll get to Hocus Pocus in a minute.
Which was actually written 8 years before it was made.
Right.
My draft, anyway. There are 11 other people on it after me, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
But to have your work talked about when nobody knows that I was the guy who directed it, right, and I'm standing in a supermarket line listening to people talking about how much they enjoyed it is an experience that is so odd and wonderful and thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, when I have guests on the show who have had obscene success in a project, I always ask them what it's like to be in the center of the hurricane when it comes into that kind of stuff. And for you, it was The Stand, and 50 million plus people watching your work in the 90s on television is something. It is a major deal. It was in the zeitgeist. It was in the zeitgeist, wasn't it?
It was and still is. People still talk about it with the remake having just been done last year. It's amazing. And yet, because it happened on television, probably more people saw it than anybody saw any movie in the theater. But it's television, it's immediate, and then it's gone. It comes back on home video, but it's gone. So Spielberg wanted King and myself to do a movie with him together that King wrote called Rose Red, which became a miniseries later when King and Spielberg couldn't agree on the direction it went. Mm-hmm. There was an 800-pound gorilla on each side.
I was about to say it's two juggernauts.
And I'm the 50-pound chimp in the middle.
Wearing a banana suit, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, because it didn't happen in a theatrical film, it's not the same as being in the eye of a hurricane. If your movie is in theaters and number one week after week after week, it's a totally different thing. Plus, it's not the director, especially in television, who is brought attention to. Right. And in this case, Stephen King not only produced it, but he wrote the screenplay himself. And so I've always been under the wing of either Steven Spielberg or Stephen King or any other Steves you can think of, but which is fine, but it doesn't bring attention to the person who's not the famous person on board. And, I'm happy to be a guy behind the camera anyway. But career moves, this Rose Red project never happened. So I didn't direct for another 3 years after having directed this massive success. So
that's insane. That's insane. But to be fair, being under the wing of either Stephen King or Steven Spielberg, not a bad place to be. And
I wouldn't change it for anything. I am the luckiest guy I can imagine.
It is pretty remarkable. And I so many people are trying to break into it's like larceny. We're trying to break into the business. It's always like, I got to hack in, I got to break in, I got to get through the back door. Like it's always something along those lines. Talking, and I'm sure you've come across this too, talking to the people you've had on your show, is things that happen. A lot of times it's just right place, right time kind of scenario. It's right place, right time. And all you could do is prepare. You were 33 when Steven showed up, but you had been preparing for that moment all your life, essentially.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
It's not only right place and right time, but it's also the ability to deliver what people are looking for, right, and to be a person that people want to work with.
Again,
if I were a producer looking for a screenwriter, and I had some egomaniac pitching me in my office and telling me how to do things and the like, right, no matter how good the story is, I don't know that I'd want to go through that process. But it's the ability to deliver too. I was very lucky in that at the time I was confronted with Steven Spielberg and I'm interviewing him on location for the Goonies. They were looking for something that I was capable of delivering, and that they saw at the same time my agent had sent to his people a spec script to read. And so while I'm in Astoria, Oregon, while Steven Spielberg is in Astoria, Oregon, someone in Universal City is typing up coverage saying they should hire this guy that he just spent time with. And, the timing could not have been more fortuitous. And the good news was there was material to back it up that didn't come from me, but came from his development people saying, take a look at this guy. Well, you should hire him. And I happened to be in front of him the day before he got that.
Now, would you agree, you've been in this business a long time. I've been in it over 25 plus years, hacking away as well. I've told people the best advice I could give anybody trying to get into this business is don't be a dick. And I think that is a mantra that a lot of filmmakers and screenwriters don't understand. And you are a personification of it, because it was because of you being so, you're able to work and connect with people like Steven that he hired you again and hired you again. If you were a dick on that first pilot that you were writing, the first episode you were writing, Kathy Kennedy and Steven wouldn't have called you up and like, hey, do you want to be a story editor? And if that experience wouldn't have gone well, there's no batteries not included, and your career could have gone on a completely different trajectory just by being, obviously you have to have talent and being able to provide the service that you said you can.
Right.
But that nice is really something that a lot of screenwriters they underestimate how important, because would you as a filmmaker and a producer work with someone who might be slightly less talented or experienced, but wonderful to work with, as opposed to a much more superior writer, but just a complete ass?
Well, no, I'd probably write it myself.
But it's a general comment.
Yeah, but no, that's probably true. I mean, I'd much rather write with somebody if it's for me to direct, I'm going to write the last draft anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, you want to work with people who you respect their talents and their abilities, as well as being able to sit in a room and bounce ideas back and forth and have a good time doing it. Everything about making movies is incredibly difficult. And so the more fun you can have doing it, often it reflects. Now, it is often said that the hardest movies to make are the ones that come out the best. That's not really true. And you can feel the camaraderie of when a creative group is clicking with one another. But another thing about screenwriting is that spelling matters. It is literary. It's
grammar.
Yes, it's a blueprint. And the extreme example of that is Walter Hill's shooting script for Alien, which is just so spare and sparse and all. But also, if you're writing a screenplay, you're not just laying down a blueprint. And first of all, you're not telling a director how to direct his shots. That's not part of the job. Right. But you are engaging the reader in the same way you would engage the reader of a novel. You want the descriptions not only to just be guy goes in store, sneezes, buys a box of Kleenex. You want to embroider it with language that compels you. And it's not just strictly a schematic, which a lot of people feel it is. So being able to write well, writing fiction is a really good practice for writing screenplays too. Stephen King, you want to turn every page because he engages you, the humanity of his prose, he writes very sparsely, but it is woven in such a way that it compels you to turn the page. And a screenplay needs to do that too. It's not there just for an actor to mark in yellow marker his dialogue and not read the description scenes in between. But those descriptions have to be compelling. They have to be interesting, and they can't just be. Nothing is harder for me to read an action movie script where you're describing lots of action scenes in detail. I can't do it. I can't get through it. But anything that draws the reader in, whether it's fiction or screenwriting, is the most important thing. If writing had never been invented, if a camera came first, no one would have ever invented the written word to take it down, to cast it into history. But we have developed an ability to tell stories in engaging ways, and the use of words and grammar matters. If I'm reading a script and the first 5 pages have 42 typos and your are used improperly and things like that, I feel like I'm reading someone who is an amateur. Mm-hmm. And you want something that is more compelling than that.
Yeah, and also I've heard it referred to as the sea of white. You want that page to be a sea of white as much as you can, but yet, especially in the descriptions, and I've said this many times on the show, I equate it to being a haiku. You got to really get a lot of information in with very sparse words, but you have to make it interesting for the reader. The shooting script could become something else, but the actual script that a reader reads, a producer reads, a director reads, it has to be that kind of thing that pops. But you can't. But you can't spend
Go ahead and give your description, but make it captivating. Make it funny, make it really propulsive, and mm-hmm. I tend to fully capitalize important words in a script, whether it's in introducing a new character or not. I will make sure that you don't miss those important words. They stick out.
Right. And it's you don't have the luxury of writing a page on how that tissue feels.
Right. Exactly.
Where I've read a lot of scripts that do that the writer just sits there and it's a 240 page script. Okay. It's done.
I'll tell you a story about Batteries Not Included. I felt my life was on the line. This was the biggest opportunity anybody had given me, write a feature for Universal and Amblin and Steven Spielberg. My first draft was 140 pages.
A little beefy.
Yeah, very deep. So I turned it in, and it was a while. It was a while before I heard back from Steven. And then, he called me into the office, and I'm being dead honest here in painful ways. But he said, it took me 3 sittings to read this script. And that's not a good thing. But that was the best thing anybody could have said to me. And he did it because he wanted me to learn. He wasn't criticizing me, but he was telling me I'd fucked up. And so I took it to heart, and I took it home, and I worked on it. I worked on brevity, and I tightened it up and made it much better, brought it in at 110 pages, and it got the green light. So I had learned my lesson, and it's a lesson that has stuck with me ever since.
Now, you also worked with Stephen King on the Shining miniseries, which has a lot. I mean, the Shining movie adaptations have a lot of lore behind it because of Stanley Kubrick's version, and Mr. King finally came out and said, "I despise it. I hate what he did with it." And I think they're just two different things. I mean, Stanley just did what he wanted with the material.
Well, Kubrick did a Kubrick film, and
not a King film. Not a King film.
And there's a big difference between them as artists. Kubrick is very cool, and King is very warm.
You're right.
King is all about the humanity. But also, it's a very personal book to King. When he wrote it, he was a drinking alcoholic.
Oh, wow.
And it was all about alcoholism and the guilt he felt for actually hurting his child, breaking an arm of the character of Jack Torrance's child in a drunken rage. And so here he is recounting something that's personal to him. I'm sure he never broke one of his son's arms, right. But he knew that there was a boiler that was going to blow inside of Jack Torrance because he'd been in that boiler too. And so Kubrick turned it into something very chilly and very other than that. And it became an iconic horror movie, but it was not a good adaptation of a Stephen King book. And that novel is one of my favorite novels of all time. And the good news was that Stephen King himself, after the success of The Stand, ABC said to King, "What do you want to do next? Anything you want, we're all there." And he said, "I'd kind of like to do The Shining like the book." And he wrote the script himself. And it's one of the best scripts I've ever read and certainly ever had in my hands. And so because we had done so well with The Stand together and become friends on that, he trusted me with this 3 years later, and we were able to do something really special with that too.
Yeah, it was remarkable. I love watching both versions and seeing the distinct differences between your version and Stanley's version. And they live as different pieces of art in different ways. There's no question.
They're on the same shelf in the video store.
Exactly. If we may go back to kids, just Google video store. You'll see it's very cool. Now, there's a project or a film that you wrote that I don't think you thought, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't think you would think it would have the legs that it has had, nor the love that has come from it. It was just Hocus Pocus. It's become this classic Hollywood Halloween film, but it's a Halloween family film, which is pretty amazing to hit the. It was not particularly successful when it came out. It was a very mild success, right?
But over time, and it really started with the Disney Channel. They started running it on Halloween, and then ABC started doing it. And every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and people keep asking about a sequel and all that. That's finally about to start production.
Right.
And the merchandise, it's the biggest Halloween movie in history. And
even bigger than Halloween.
Yeah. And who would have guessed? On Halloween Day on Freeform, they show it back to back 12 times on that day, and every day of the month of October they show it.
Yeah, so, and my children finally just watched it. They're not they're young girls, and we watched it on Disney Plus because it came on Disney Plus, and we watched it. And I hadn't seen it probably since the video store days. I'd seen clips of it, but I hadn't seen it. And I sat there like, wow, this is so much fun. It's just like a fun film. And I'm like, oh my God, they're making a sequel and they're all coming back. Oh my God, this going to be great.
Well, and it's again, I was hired to do that because I was working with Steven Spielberg at the time. Mm-hmm. And the producer, David Kirshner, who came up with the idea and designed all the characters and everything, had just done An American Tail for Spielberg and Amblin. Oh, so it was two Spielberg guys getting together with, what Disney wanted. And at first, Steven was interested in being a part of it. And then it was like, oh, with Disney? nah, we're going after the same audience. And they were very competitive at that time. So it was almost a collaboration with Spielberg, Disney, and sorry, my gardener is going.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
It's not to me, but it figures. But yeah, it's amazing to hit with something that you go out on Halloween night and you see children dressed as Billy Butcherson and the Sanderson sisters, and they carry their big book, the book of spells. And it's like, I helped create that thing. This thing exists partly because of me. And it's really humbling.
Yeah, and it's something that just lives on and on and on. And you've been a part of things that have shelf life. I think Hocus Pocus arguably is the thing that holds, like it just holds. It's been going on and on and on and on and on. Absolutely.
And I have had the fortune of having worked on things that were not successful initially that became either cult favorites or much more successful in their afterlife than in their first lives. Critters 2 shows in theaters and festivals every Easter and on television and stuff. It's one of the few Easter horror movies. And you don't see Critters 1 revived. You see Critters 2 revived. And Psycho 4 was only seen on Showtime when it came out. And, it was written by the same guy who wrote Psycho 1. And, it has developed a love, and the stand huge, and it still maintains its power. And to be able to create something, popular culture is very much of its moment, and it's not meant to last forever. But fortunately, I've been involved in some projects that have had a very long shelf life, and a shelf life that continues to grow. And so maybe it's better to have flops that become successful later.
I mean, the residual payments become better later, I guess.
Yeah, I wish. You know how residuals work. They shrink every time.
I know, but is it like Seinfeld where you get a penny? You get 1,000 checks that are a penny each?
Yes. Yeah, and the stamps are more than the check stuff.
That's something that a lot of writers think that, and I'd love to hear what you think about it, because I think things have changed so much over the last 10 years. I've known a lot of people in the guilds and that get those residual checks, and they do get smaller every year, but then they boost up when a new release comes out. Like, it just hit HBO. Okay, great. Oh, okay, right. Just hit video. But nowadays, with streaming and everything, it's not what it was once before. So I think a lot of young writers coming in, they're like, oh, I got to get that sweet residual money. Like, we're going to be living the life like Seinfeld and Friends. And I'm like, I don't think that even exists anymore. I think that's that kind of residual. Like, I mean, Friends, those guys still.
Pay TV and theatrical and that sort of thing, and network television, broadcast, cable television, those residuals live on. But in streaming, Netflix doesn't pay residuals, even for their original programming. So you got to make a big deal up front. But I don't know what I would do if I were a new filmmaker starting out, because there are movies made by filmmakers you would know, and films you've seen and that that you like, that are familiar, where those filmmakers can't make a living off of what they get paid to make them for. It's in the world of streaming, it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. Who knows from a little thumbnail on Amazon Prime if it's good or if it's not. And, Netflix will produce movies that they don't promote and just say, let's see what happens, see if they hit. Mm-hmm. Or they'll make something like Bird Box, which connects in a big way. But the residual thing, if you want to write or make movies, you have to do it out of a passion and out of a true desire to be a creative force. Because if you do it to make money, you're in the wrong business. Anybody who sets out to make money making movies is in it for the wrong reason, and they're not going to make it.
Right. What's that saying? How do you become a millionaire in the film business? Start with $1 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so true. And I've had so many filmmakers over the years come to me like, well, yeah, I'm going to make this money and that money. I'm like, honey, sir, this is you are so in the wrong, do you run into this? I mean, I'm sure you've spoken to screenwriters, coming up screenwriters and filmmakers over the years. Do you see a lot of I call it the lottery ticket mentality, where they think the next movie is going to give them, that they're going to get Steven Spielberg's eye and he's going to come down and do all this stuff, or it's going to hit Sundance, or it's going to get me an agent that's going to give me $1 million on my next spec or something. Do you see that mentality in people you run into?
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
There's still enough of that happening that it's worth, don't give up a dream. If you've been pounding your head against the wall for 20 years and have never sold a screenplay, chances are good that it may not happen. But then it might. I've just reworked a movie that I wrote. I wrote a screenplay 30 years ago called Jimmy Miracle. And I've always thought it was the best movie idea I ever had. And Spielberg loved it at the time, but it wasn't a movie whose time had come. And it's a period picture. It takes place during the Depression. And so I thought maybe I'll write it as a novel, and I rewrite it now and then. But I came up with an idea on how to completely revamp it and keep all of the elements that made it exciting to me, but gave it new elements that made it even more exciting to me. And almost immediately it's been optioned and we're taking it out to the studios next week. So, you got to keep at it as long as you can stand it. But if it's been 20 years and you haven't been able to do it, then do it. Not, don't live at your mom's house mowing lawns in the hopes that you're going to make it as a screenwriter if it hasn't happened for 20 years. Go ahead and get your job as a lawyer, finish school and do that. But, a lot of times I wrote more when I was working a day job than I do working full time as a writer and filmmaker. But it's something. It doesn't cost you anything to be a writer. And, it's a great hobby regardless of whether things get made or not. I've written a lot of spec scripts that have never been made or optioned. And that's just part of the game. But I get to be a better writer each time I do it.
Now, there's one other project I wanted to talk to you about, which is I generally don't bring up short films on this on this show. But I mean, you worked on Ghost, which was a famous short film starring the late
short.
Not that well, I mean, quote unquote short. Starring the late great Michael Jackson, and your collaborator was also the late great Stan Winston,
and Stephen King.
And that's right, Stephen King was involved in that as well. So, I mean, talk about a trifecta of icons, each of them an icon, and you're working. What was it like collaborating with Michael Jackson and Steven and Stan on this and the short film, which I remember was not released in the States
it
for a while.
For a long time.
Yeah, for
a while. I think it premiered on Halloween like 2 years after it had been made.
Yeah, it'd been because I wanted to watch it.
Yeah,
I couldn't see it.
It was an incredibly troubled production for a number of reasons, including the obvious ones, but. Michael went to Stephen King. He said, I want to make the scariest movie ever, because he had so much enjoyed making Thriller, in which I am a zombie, by the way.
Oh, wow. I mean, what? You should have led with that, Mick. I mean, come on.
I buried the lead, yeah. So I was shooting The Stand at the time, and King had written a draft for Michael, and he'd recommended me as the director to Michael. And so I met with Michael and we hit it off great. He was very sweet. And so we started production and we shot for 2 weeks. It was originally going to be the end title song for Adam's Family Values. Mm-hmm. And once we were shooting, we shot for 2 weeks and never got to the musical number yet. When you work with Michael, you worked on Michael time, and it didn't have much to do with a 24-hour clock or even a 30-day calendar. So, he was great and hardworking, but it was really slow. And 2 weeks into the shoot, Michael didn't show up the next day. And suddenly we started hearing about this scandal that had happened that none of us believed, because anybody who'd worked with him could not believe that this was going on. And to this day, I don't know what the truth of it is. My only experiences with Michael were really good ones. We became friends, but if he did what it said he had done, it's the worst thing in the world. And if he didn't, it's also the worst thing in the world. But he disappeared, and it turned out he was in Thailand. And then we were going to finish it in Japan, and my line producer went to Japan and shipped all of the sets we'd been working on to Japan. And then they were shipped back. It didn't happen for 3 years. And then Michael said, okay, I'm ready. We're going to do it now. Mick, it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. And
it's very, very good. Very good impression, by the way.
Thank you. But I was already scheduled to do The Shining with Stephen King next. And so I said, Michael, I can't just keep putting this off. I have a hard start date, and you don't. So I think you should talk to Stan Winston. They were friends. Stan was a very good director. He had done Pumpkinhead at that time. And so I said, you guys are friends. He's doing the special effects anyway. You should ask him. And he did. And so I had shot 2 weeks worth of stuff, including a lot of the visual effects stuff that Stan's company did, Digital Domain, Stan and Jim Cameron's company. And so Stan took it over, and it was great. It was everything but the kitchen sink. It was a 35-minute movie that was originally going to be a 7-minute music video, at most a 15-minute video. But Michael ended up paying for the whole thing. It ended up costing $15 million, the most expensive music video in history. And it was a blast, but I would love to have seen it through from beginning to end, but I wouldn't have been able to do The Shining.
And I'll tell you, I had the pleasure of going to Stan's studio, visiting Stan's studio while he was still alive. And I didn't get to meet Stan, but I got to go. They toured me through the entire studio, and that boardroom. Oh my God, that boardroom! For everyone listening, the boardroom had the Terminator, the Predator, an Alien, like Tom Cruise's Lestat from Interview with a Vampire, all that stuff.
And Christopher Lloyd holding his head from the Amazing Stories episode that I wrote.
That's right. All of that stuff it was 2 stories. I remember two floors of all these things looking down on you. I'm like, how cool is it to have meetings in here?
Lucky people.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What are 3 screenplays every screenwriter should read?
Every screenwriter should read. Well, Alien, to see just how concise it can be. Anything by Preston Sturges, to see just what dialogue can be at its best. And, Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond, A Sunset Boulevard, is a great example. Now, none of those are contemporary. I think some of the Tarantino's writing is amazing. He's not the best speller, but
when you're Tarantino, it's okay.
It doesn't matter because his dialogue and everything is so great, and the ideas are big. And most people will say, don't write a dialogue scene longer than 4 or 5 pages. He can give you 15 great pages of dialogue, and you savor every word. So
like in Inglourious Basterds, I'd like that scene in the basement with all the Nazis. That was like 20 minutes.
Amazing.
20 or 30 minutes of the movie was just that scene. It is truly, truly remarkable. Do you appreciate, just as a viewer and as a filmmaker, people and filmmakers and screenwriters who take the swings at bat? They might not always connect, but they take the big swings.
Absolutely. I think Jordan Peele doing Get Out was great. Mm-hmm. And then when he did Us, he took bigger swings. They didn't connect as much, but it was great to see him make the attempt to go beyond what he's already done. And yeah, I mean, obviously my favorite films are where it works in every level. Sure. But I love creative. There's a couple of filmmakers named Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson who write and direct their own movies, and they take big fantastical swings, and they more often than not connect. And it's really fun to see adventurous movies. And you know, I'm not a fan of franchise movies, particularly within the horror genre. It's you know, I want to see the next David Cronenberg, you know, somebody whose films are so iconoclastic that they couldn't be made by anybody else.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and Carpenter, obviously, with Halloween, and well, I mean, the list of things that John has done.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Jesus.
So great.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter trying to break into the business today?
Write and write and write and write. And you need to be represented, but you need to write something that's not just good, but reflects a personality that nobody else has. It needs to be something, an agent's taking home 30 scripts every weekend. And most of those scripts, he's not going to get further than 5 or 10 pages. And you need to galvanize your reader and make that reader excited that he's reading a movie that not only is really great, but is something he feels an audience will come to see. He's not looking for an art film, although there are great commercial art films. You know, you're talking about a medium that costs millions of dollars to do it right. And you're not just masturbating with a camera. Right. You're doing something for an audience, not for yourself. Now, please yourself first and please the audience as well. But if you imbue your writing with your own personality, in a personality that stands out from all others and makes your script, even if it's audacious, even if they don't buy the script, they look at it and go, this is a writer we should meet with who might be right for such and such a project. So it's just do the best that you can in the most original way that you can to differentiate yourself from the other 29.
And it is true that, and I think a lot of screenwriters and filmmakers don't understand this, is that they need to understand what their secret sauce is and lean into that secret sauce. Don't try to be Tarantino, because you're never going to be Tarantino. He's already Tarantino.
Right.
You're never going to be. We already have a Nolan. We already have a Carpenter. You can be inspired by them, but you have
absolutely.
But you have to have that secret sauce, and that's the only thing in the marketplace that nobody else has, right?
Yeah, I mean, your main target is to get them to want to keep turning the page. Make your scripts readable.
Excellent. Excellent advice. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Well, in life, I think there are still lessons I haven't completely learned. But as far as the film industry goes, I mean, it's always going to be up and down. You can do something huge like The Stand and not work again for 3 years.
Right.
You know,
it's insane.
It's every bit as hard the second, third, fourth, and fifth time out as the first time. Maybe the wheels have been greased a bit in that people know who you are or know your work. But you have to keep proving yourself, and you can't rest on your laurels because those wear out real quick.
And finally, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Okay. Dead Ringers.
Oh, great. Cronenberg. Yes. Great.
The
great
Bride
film.
of Frankenstein.
Yes.
And Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Nice combination. That's a good movie night. That is a good movie night.
They have nothing in common. Yeah.
Now, and where can people watch your show and consume your content, sir?
Okay, my podcast, Postmortem with Mick Garris, is on Apple Podcasts and every other podcast app around. We do interviews every other week, and on the alternating weeks, we do Postmortem AMA, where you can ask Mick anything, and we solicit questions. I'm on Facebook at Postmortem with Mick Garris, Mick Garris PM on Instagram and on Twitter, and we'll keep things alive that way all the time. You'll know what's coming and when we're asking for questions from the audience and all that stuff.
And I will put that all in the show notes. Mick, thank you so much for taking the time for being on the show and dropping your knowledge bombs on my tribe today. So I appreciate it, my friend.
All right. Always a pleasure, Alex. Thank you.
I want to thank Mick for coming on the show and dropping his knowledge bombs on the tribe today. Mick, thank you so much. If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, including how to listen to his award-winning podcast, Postmortem, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/127. And guys, if you want to make a little extra cheddar on the side while learning the craft of screenwriting, I suggest you become a script reader. Some of the best screenwriters in Hollywood start off as script readers and writing coverage for other people's scripts. There you learn so much about not only the craft, but about what the marketplace is looking for. And we have a course on IFH Academy called How to Become a Hollywood Script Reader, taught by industry insiders Christopher Lockhart from William Morris Endeavor and Jack Denabel, a writer and development consultant throughout Hollywood, and was a senior story analyst at ICM, among many other projects he's worked on. It is an amazing webinar, and I suggest you guys take it. Even if you don't want to be a script reader, but learn more the craft and how scripts are structured and what the marketplace is looking for, I suggest you check it out and head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/script reader. Thank you so much for listening, guys. As always, keep on writing, no matter what. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.